All right, yeah, all the painful stuff was this morning. That was the diagnosis. Now it's just how do we move beyond that? And so I want to share with you a story of a church. They'd asked me specifically in this section to talk about. You're going to hear the name Baltimore first because that's a 70, 80, 90-year-old church that had moved almost 15 years earlier into a new community, and they never changed their name. And that was one of the things that we had to do. So sometimes you'll hear it referred to as Ellicott City Church. But it's the same church, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. But to just kind of give you a little bit of background, I'm going to skip over all this. Oh, this is all good stuff, too. You'll have to get it on the PowerPoint. But what this is a walk through the book of Acts and what God does. The fact is, God grows churches. I believe that with all my heart. I'm like Brad. I believe that churches are naturally will grow if we remove the inhibitors. That God wants to grow His church, but sometimes we get in the way, and we just need to create an environment where God is free and we're not doing anything. You know, a lot of people they will speak to me about what can I do to grow my church. Well, you know, every church is different. And what I'm going to be sharing is what I experienced, but it's not necessarily going to be the same thing for you. I have found there's not a secret bullet. There's not a pill that you take this and you're going to begin to grow. Church growth is about doing a lot of things well. There's a lot, picture it this way, a lot of knobs that have to be tweaked, but probably not very much. That's why it's important for us to realize when we identify something that's an issue, you have to deal with it because you can't give away too many things and say, well, that's off the table, or I'm not going to deal with that, because it's usually just a few things that need to be changed so that a church will begin to naturally grow. So anyway, this is really all about the early church because I believe we're the remnant. I heard it when I became a Seventh-day Adventist that we're the remnant church. I believe that. I believe in the concept of the remnant. I know there's some theology out there that loses track of that. But if you don't believe that the Adventist church is the remnant, you ought to go find it and be a part of it. I'm absolutely convinced we are prophetic in our origin and our calling, and we will remain that way until Jesus comes. We know how the story's going to end. We started out as a prophetic movement. You know, even before we were a church in 1863, we were holding prophecy seminars before we ever got started, and Revelation chapter 10 tells us we're going to finish that way. We must prophesy again. So it's our identity. We might as well embrace who we are and not try to be anything different. But I love preaching an evangelistic series. I'm not a great evangelist. I admit that. I'm not as good as Ralph and as good as a lot of others, but they can't be everywhere. So some of us got to pick up and do the best we can, and God will help us in that. But we always get to that message where we talk about the remnant. Usually it's a couple weeks into an evangelistic meeting. We've been able to share some really powerful truth from the Word of God that brings conviction. And then we talk to them about what are you going to do with all of what you've learned? Do you feel like God is calling you to be a part of a church that He calls the remnant? And as we identify the remnant, we're always very careful to say the remnant looks like the original. And we do that in the basis of doctrine, and that makes sense. But shouldn't the church today also look like the church in the New Testament as far as the Holy Spirit power? As far as God's blessing, as far as, you know, people ask me all the time, are there miracles in your church? Yes. If there are not miracles in your church, then God isn't probably doing that much, or you're missing them. Open your eyes and see what God is doing. But the most distinguishing mark of the remnant church is growth. And I just believe, for me personally as a pastor, and prior to being a pastor, I was an elder. I planted a church as an elder. I believe to be in the will of God, we ought to be a part of an organization that's growing. And so growth. And I was a part of a church that wasn't experiencing that. We were baptizing people, but they were going out just about as fast as we could baptize them, and we never seemed to grow. And out of that frustration, is what led me to be a part of a church plant. And I'm going to go through this very quickly because I didn't know anything about planting. In Adventist circles, sometimes we haven't been as intentional as we should. And churches just kind of propped up different places, and God blesses that. But I had an opportunity to plant a church, and I was tired of seeing what couldn't be done, and I really wanted to just see what God would do. If you literally, Brad made the comment, if you surrender the church, if you surrender it, and just let God have his way, what could happen? And so we started processing this idea of a plant, but we didn't want to plant a church that would look just like everything else. We wanted a church that would be very different. It would be defined by what I was sharing with you earlier. One purpose, and that is to reach the lost. It isn't about worship. It isn't about all the other stuff that we will do as a church. We'll do some of that if it lends itself to helping us to reach lost people, but we wanted to see what would happen. One purpose, just simply to grow God's kingdom. We wanted to reach the lost. We wanted to reach other Christians because as Seventh-day Adventists, you put two Baptists in a room and they're happy, or a Baptist and a Methodist, a Baptist and a Presbyterian, they got no problem. You add an Adventist, and he's thinking about how am I going to win these other guys? And it's who we are. It's part of our calling because there are people who know Jesus, make no mistake about it. They know Jesus in the Baptist church. They know Jesus, or they should know him, but they don't know all of what God has revealed. And part of our commission is teaching them to observe all things whatsoever command. So I believe there's a lot of people that are on a journey, and they may spend some time in different faith groups until God leads them to be a part of the Adventist church. So I don't make any apologies that I want to share with my other Christian friends some truth that they may not understand. So reaching lost people is going to be our loss. Our belief was that there were hundreds and thousands. I got to believe that evangelism at its heart is really telling people the truth about God, the truth about the love of God, the truth about who he is and what he wants for us. And who could resist that? Who could resist that? It's such a compelling story when you can do it that way. And so I know evangelism gets a bad rap, and I don't know why. Maybe it's just some of us are down on what we're not up on. But at the heart of any evangelistic series that I've ever been a part of or witnessed, the love of Jesus is just so compelling that God would send his son to die for us and that we get to be a part of that. And we just believe that there would be many, many people. Our strategy was a culture of evangelism, nonstop evangelism. Some of you have seen this. But as soon as we launched this idea, we're going to plant a church that was built for reaching lost people, you would have thought we had left Adventism. Heresy. There were people trying to talk us out. Oh, you can't do that. And I mean, here, public evangelism doesn't work. People are too busy. It's too expensive. Adventist message is too distinctive. You know what? My journey from Tulsa led me to Seattle as an administrator up there. And Seattle's a very secular place. Let me say it this way. It's an unchurched place. It's not so much secular, although it is. But, the idea is people are looking for something different. Surveys up there say that while there are very few people that attend church, they believe in God or they believe in a higher power. They don't know how to quantify it. But they are looking for something. The churches that are growing up in that area are the way outside the mainstream. For some reason, too many Adventists have been thinking our church growth ought to be to pretend more like Baptists or more like Methodists. So we're accepted more. But the reality is our distinctiveness is an asset. It appeals to people. I've never understood why we want to make the church more worldly rather than more holy. And I'm not a legalist by any means, but the appeal of the call of God to save a sinner and to cleanse them from sin and put them on a path, I think there's something very motivational and uplifting, inspiring that God wants me to live a better life now that I know him than when I didn't know him. And so I love the idea that, Adventists, we don't mess around. We tell you, how to live, how to dress, where to work, what to eat. God's going to be Lord of all of it, right? And there's not very many other denominations that do that. So, but people see it as a negative. I see it as a positive.
we won't reach postmoderns, and this one really got my goat, that evangelism only appeals to the lower class, as if, well, we don't want those. But I tell you, the Adventist church has done more to lift people in life than any government agency out there. And I love the fact that a person that is down and out and is struggling in life, 3 or 4 or 5 years of giving their heart to the Lord and becoming a part of a good, nurturing church, man, their life turns around big time. And so here's what happened. We decided to plant a church. It was called South Tulsa Adventist Fellowship. We later changed the name. And it immediately, God confirmed our belief that if we would focus on that, He would show up, and He would show up in powerful ways. And we saw that over a sustained period of time. We were one of the fastest growing large churches in AD, and we were lay-led. We didn't know what we were doing. This wasn't about what we know what we're doing. God knew what He was doing, and that was enough. And so no one gets credit for that other than God. You've heard NCD mentioned a few times. We never really understood NCD. We didn't know anything about church planting. Russell Burroughs shows up one time because he used to quote reference our church in some of the seminary classes and whatnot, and he thought he would tell people, oh, they just do nonstop evangelism and they grow. And he finally showed up one day, and he looked around, and he said, this isn't a story just about evangelism. This is a story of a healthy church. Adventists have always been a little bit holistic, and that's a good thing. It's not one thing. It's when a lot of things are working together. And as he was looking around, observing the church for the first time in the flesh, he said, this is a healthy church. He says, what's your NCD score? I said, what's NCD? And he shared with me, and we decided to do that. And in fact, we were a very healthy church as a result of that. And because of that, not because of it, but it's reflected in the growth. Churches that are healthy will grow, and we saw some tremendous growth. Not just transfer growth, although you get some of that. You get people want to be a part of a church where the Spirit of God is at work, and so you're always going to get people that will want to be where God is at work. So we had some of that, but we had 600 baptisms in 10 years. And it's exciting. Think about it. There's only 52 Sabbaths, and we like to do one at a time if we can. We love to stretch them out. Make it. If we're gonna pray in a worship service, if we're gonna read the Scripture in a worship service, if we're gonna have a sermon in the worship service, why not have a baptism? And so we love doing that, and we contributed to other churches having that. We would do meetings, and people lived too far, and they'd end up in another church. So we don't know what the impact was, but the belief and our gut feeling was that God would show up, and indeed He did. We planted a Spanish and a Korean council, but here's what happened. Over the course of 10 years, I'm not kidding you, hundreds of church leaders, lay leaders, elders, pastors, conference presidents, just a host of people traveled to Tulsa to try to figure out what is it that and I think to some degree many of them walked away disappointed because they were hoping it was something new. And what you're going to find out is there's really very little new. It's just kind of a common sense approach, holistic approach to church growth, and a healthy church will grow. But here's what would ultimately be thrown up at me, and it's a valid observation. Church leaders would say, and pastors would say privately, you did this because you handpicked those people. Pastors love the idea of being able, or even the head elders or whoever's going to, church planters, let me just say it that way, that they're going to get to handpick a core group of people to go out and plant a church. Think about it. If anything ought to ensure success, it's that. And so that's what they said. It happened in a church plant, but could it happen in an existing church? And the fact is, I didn't know. Because I'd pastored there for 10, almost 11 years. And by the time I was done there, I went into full-time administration and did that for Oklahoma. And then ultimately, I was in Washington Conference as vice president for church growth. Wasn't pastoring anymore. And that lingering thought was always there. It did work in a church plant, no doubt about it, but could it work? How about this one? How about an existing, dysfunctional, declining, unhealthy church? because that's where most of the churches are. That if it doesn't do this, then what we're doing here today is a waste of time. Because if we can't figure out, we can't plant enough churches to replace the dead and dying ones. We just can't. There's over 5,000 churches out there. Many of them are in need of revival. And we're planting, maybe conferences are planning 20, 30, even over a couple-year period. I don't know what the Carolina Conference is, but it's hard to plant. It's tough to start from nothing. But we've got a huge investment in infrastructure. It's not full on Sabbath, but we got buildings, they're paid for, there might be a little bit of debt. There's already, a group of people there. All we need to do is to flip the switch and see these churches revived. And so that was the question. Would it work? So that had lingered with me for a long time. I was up in Washington. We had done some leadership and development stuff we called Partners for Growth, which is kind of like this, except we invited church teams. You might think about that. Boards with pastors to come in and be a part of a process and discussions and all of that. Gary Gibbs over in Chesapeake wanted me to be a part of launching it out there, which I did. And then he looked at me and he said, "Bill, you're a pastor. What are you doing in the conference office?" He said, "You're a pastor." And I admit it. When I went into the conference office, I missed the local church. I missed being a visitor every week. That's what administrators do. When they come here, you need to love on them because they don't have a home church. He said, "What would it take to get you back in the church?" And I said, "Well, there's been this thing that I've always wondered about, and that was, could I pastor a dead and dying church and bring it back to life?" And he said, "We got some of those." We got some of those. And so we started a dialogue, and it took a little while because it's a big move. It's not the normal path that a person takes. And we began to pray about it. I talked to my wife about it. My daughter had just got married, lived 3 blocks from us, and for maybe half a mile. And we're moving all from Washington to Washington. I mean, that's tough. But the appeal of being able to watch God do something, once again, was just overwhelming. So we said yes. Here's what I want you to know. We didn't go through all the churches of the conference. We let the conference pick. We never visited the church. They never met us. We never met them. The first time that I ever met them was a Friday evening before I was going to preach. And in fact, the way it was done was probably not the best way, because one of the elders took me aside and said, "You guys are only here because there was a gun to our head." Because the conference did kind of just interject and put us in there. They were having business meetings on the Sabbath in our transition. We had already packed up the house. We were driving out. We'd stopped in South Dakota to do whatever you do in South Dakota and take the Sabbath. And we hear from the head elder, "Oh, they want to have a business meeting, decide if they want you." And I'm thinking, it's too late for that. So we decided that we would do. Here's what they were telling me about the church. Declining membership over the last several years, declining attendance, as you can imagine, significant number of transfers away. In the Chesapeake Conference, in where my church is, probably not a lie or not misleading in any way, that there are 20 or more churches within 20 miles. I mean, and a lot of healthy churches. You want to go to a church of a few thousand, you can do that. There's just a lot of church. It's very church community. And so people don't put up with it. I mean, there were some faithful ones, and they hunkered down, and they kept the doors open, and they kept going, and praise God for their commitment. But they weren't enjoying it. Nobody enjoyed that. A lot of them just said, we're moving on. And so a significant number of transfers away. There was no baptisms for 2 years. Can you believe it? They had a school. They operated an elementary school, 63 kids. You would think over a 2-year period, surely one of them would be baptized. No baptisms, negative cash flow. There was bless her heart, a dear lady, years and years and years, had a trust, and we call it a trust mature. That's a nice way of saying she passed away. And the church got $100,000, and they put it in there as a death fund is what it was. They didn't call it that, but that's primarily what it was, a death fund. And they had been drawing on it to about $3,000 a month because they were burning through cash. And because of that, they had cut everything back, no meaningful ministry at all, very few families with children, very few. Even though there were 60-something kids in that elementary school, there were only 3 of them that went to the church. There were other churches that put their kids there, and then they worshiped with them on Sabbath. The campus and the building, well, it looked like the church was dying. Major conflict with church and school constituency. I'm not kidding you. They were having business meetings where the parents and the members of the church were screaming at one another. Conference presidents tell you, they were screaming, literally, red-faced, at the top of their line. It was a pitiful situation. Major conflict, very poor spiritual climate due to the conflicts. And here's NCD. Here's what their NCD, I don't know if you can see all that, but very typical. Their average was up there, I can't read what that is, right there. Oh, that's the average, I'm sorry. The average is 40. Their minimum factor was effective structures, which is very typical of a church that has forgotten how to be a church. And you can see passionate spirituality. Adventist churches usually do pretty well on that. We know what we believe. We know why we believe it. And especially those that hang around, they're very spiritually minded. And so that's the church that we walked into with just really no mandate whatsoever. My wife and I showed up in town. That Wednesday, I think, Thursday, I met the head elder and I walked through the church. And my wife will tell you this is true. I went back to the apartment and I cried. The building was in such, I mean, it's just, they'd given up. They had just given up, and it looked like it. It was dirty. It was run down. And it didn't have to be that way because it could clean up. Some of it needed some work, but they had just given up. It looked like a dead church. It looked like a dying church. And so she said, what are we going to do? I said, well, we're already here. We're not giving up. And so Friday evening, we met with the leadership team for the first time. We had a meeting in which that one meeting, the church turned. We didn't do anything that night except make a decision. We didn't do anything that night except pray. We just made some very powerful decisions that night that we were not going to do what we've done, and we were going to begin to grow, and we were going to ask God to do that. I call it a come to Jesus meeting, and some of our churches need that, where we go into a room with the influencers, with the key people, and we talk about what has been happening, and is this God-honoring or not? Is this what God would have? And if we come to the conclusion it's not, and God wants something different, then we must commit ourselves to do that. And so I led them to make that commitment. And that night we did one thing. We voted one thing that was an affirmation. You know, we made the decision. I didn't want them to even go home. They hadn't even heard me preach. Well, probably they did because of the internet and all. But we did one thing, and that was we voted to have an evangelistic meeting in 90 days. A church that's yelling at one another, a church with all kinds of conflict, with no money, a building that's broken down, hadn't baptized. Everybody in that room would have said, we're not healthy enough. You ever heard that, Ralph? We're not healthy enough to do evangelism, but it didn't matter. You know, in fact, Ellen White says, it is what leads us to health, sharing our faith. You don't get healthy by not doing what God has called you to do. And so we made that decision, 90 days, that we would do that. And we made that commitment, and I'll share a little bit in the afternoon some of the details. But let me share with you what's happened. This was 3 years. 3 years later, here was the NCD, and here is the NCD 3 years later. Our average is 81. You can tell we really focused on functional structures, or effective structures is what they're called now. And the church, it's not just scored well on NCD, it has been amazing to watch what God has done. And you can see kind of the net growth in each one of those areas. But effective structures I want to talk more about, because if there's one thing, there's one thing that will help turn a church, it's structure. Oftentimes, churches that have lost their mission, they've lost their focus, you kind of have to break them down again. You can't just keep doing more of what you've been doing. You got to step back and you got to think, what is it that we need to do? And you kind of relaunch ministry. Sometimes it's helpful to eliminate some ministry and start back making sure ministry is built upon the correct foundation. So here's the numbers for the administrators in the room that like that. 2014 was the year we arrived in July, August timeframe. We actually immediately saw attendance tick up. The administration told me, oh, as soon as you're there, all those people will come back. Didn't happen because other churches had welcomed them in open arms. And they're a healthy church. They were leading. They were already serving in other places. So we didn't get this big spike that would happen. We did go out and visit the people that were, we had 450 people on the books and 70 of them coming. So we had a number of people that we could do, and we reclaimed some of those. But we started doing that first evangelistic meeting. It was in October by the time we had it, and by December, God gave us 3 souls. Not very many, but 3 souls was huge for that congregation. They saw God in this very affluent area. God would, in fact, work. And so we've seen attendance, we're between 275 and 300, depending on what day we go. Baptisms, we're tracking at about 30 or 35 baptisms a year. Pray for us. This year our goal is 100. I'm afraid what I started there, because it wasn't my idea. But we go off in a retreat setting twice a year, and they set that goal. They wanted to do 100 this year, and so we're going to be chasing that. The tithe has done really well. It's surprising. Of course, this is a very affluent area, and administrators love this because our tithe is on track for tripling or doubling this year. It takes a little time for new believers. They have classes of people, the haves, the have-nots, and the have-not paid for what they have. We got a lot of the third group. And so all of a sudden you're asking for a tithe and offering on top of that. But we've seen an amazing thing happen. Here's what the church looks like today. Ellicott City is now a healthy, externally focused, missional growing church. Look, it's not a perfect church. And it's just not. There's still a lot of work to do. There are still things that we need to work out. And sometimes you can look at it and you can become, and if you're going to go through this process, you're always looking at it going, oh, I wish I could do this, I wish you could do that. But the fact is, you got to remember from whence you came. And when you see God at work, you have to accept that. This is not necessarily a church that I would join if I lived in that community, because it really doesn't minister to me. I believe churches have their natural personality. Its worship style is very traditional, and even at that, it's traditional. You got Sligo, you got Spencerville, pipe organs and all that. It's hard to compete with that. I like more of a blended service. I like a little bit different, but this isn't about changing what we do. It's about how we do it often, the attitude in which we do it, and the perception. So we don't need all churches to do the same music. We don't need all churches to have the same kind of ministry. Let the personality of the church drive. People are looking for authenticity. And when you're trying to pretend to be something that you're not, people pick up on it. But it's a healthy, externally focused, missional growing church. There's new life and an expectant attitude of God's blessing. I tell you, one of the things that makes a church grow after you initially get it to that area where it's starting to enjoy health is excited church members. Excited church members. It just comes out. The team from Australia was there. I don't know if anybody did, but I've seen what our church members do. They get them off in the corner, and they try to talk them coming back to church the next week, and why don't you join? They really they're a little too aggressive for me, but they're excited about their church. People start inviting their friends back to church when they enjoy going. And so there's new life and expectant attitude. We've adopted a culture of evangelism, and I hope to be able to talk more about that in the next session. We've committed to 2 reaping evangelistic. I believe in those harvest cycles. I don't believe that evangelism is an event. Evangelism is everything you do. Evangelism starts at my sign. Actually, it starts at the website, and it's the whole experience. It's the way the church looks. It's the smell that you smell in the bathroom. It's the dirty carpet. It's the food. It's everything is contributing to this experience of giving people something that they want more of. I think a church ought to make people hungry. And I'll tell you, a good way to measure the health of a church is how fast do people leave when everything's over. I tell you, my first Sabbath there, it was crazy. I preached to about 12:15. We had lunch. We were done by 12:35. The building was locked by 12:40. I mean, it was like, we got to go. We're not used to staying here that long. It just clears out. But now it's 2:30 in the afternoon. You walk in that church right now, and it's going to be filled with just people, mulling, people sitting around tables and just lingering in this experience of what we call Sabbath. So we've adopted that culture of evangelism, 2 repeat meetings. This year we're going for 4 because we're going to get 100. We're going to try to get 100. We've committed to making disciples and not just members. This one's big for me. This one's really big for me because I know in all my years of pastoring and watching what goes on, we could baptize more people than we have. We had 30-something baptisms last year. We could have baptized 50. But we wanted to make disciples. And that's a slower process. So we tend to not baptize right after an evangelistic meeting. We let them come to church and just begin to grow as a disciple. We've seen tremendous growth among young families, children, youth, young adults. The kids have taken over the place. And it's so funny because we had none. We had none. When we showed up and started talking about we're going to start launching children's ministry and doing that, they were thinking, there's no kids here. There's no kids. We've evangelized every ministry of the church. I love that. We evangelized ministry. In other words, we won ministry back, and now it's got its purpose, and it's exciting to see a church like that. We've restructured all the systems and processes. We've launched a wealth of new meaningful ministries for our community. We remodeled the entire church and campus. It now looks like a healthy church. We've outgrown our existing facility. We actually, on Sabbath afternoon, if you want to do a 2 o'clock meeting, you can only do it 1 Sabbath a month. And let me say it this way. Every room is full till 5 o'clock, except on the 3rd Sabbath. So all the ministry leaders have to all meet on that same time if they're going to meet at the church or move outside of Sabbath. It is just absolutely crazy what we are doing. We create an all-day Sabbath experience. Our church today will go till 5:30 with children's programming. We start at 9:30, and while we make Sabbath a day. And we are retaining newly baptized members. We do really well at retention. The division says about 50%. We're upwards over 80. We play the game. We have a list every year of everybody that's been baptized. We'll talk more about that, but we're asking the question, where are they? How are they doing? And we lose some. There's no question we lose some, but we don't know if we've lost them permanently. We know that they've disconnected from the church, but we are in touch with them, but they're not worshiping with us, and we're doing everything we can, but holding 80% is better than nothing. And our baptismal goal is that. So Ellicott City is probably not that much different than many other churches. It's probably very similar to your church. In fact, loving, caring people who in their hearts want their church to grow. I saw that first night. I saw their hearts. I saw every Adventist wants to be a part of a growing, dynamic, vibrant church. They want that. They long for that. And they just don't know how to get there. Committed leaders working hard to keep things going. I mean, they were hunkered down. And they were holding the fort. And they had seen that church slide year after year after year. And I thank God, the wisdom of a conference to do something, to intervene, and to give that church hope. And people were sacrificing and working hard, but not seeing results. Maybe you find yourself in that group. I think a lot of people do. And I want you to know that what has happened in Ellicott City could happen in every church. It is not about a ton of money being injected. It's not about the best speaker coming in or pastor. It is about a church leadership team who, by the way, were probably not high on leadership. Can I say it that way? In other words, a lot of leaders had already left. And so they were very faithful, but they didn't have a lot of experience in church leadership. But God got a hold of them. We saw a vision. We gave it over to the Lord, and we've seen all of that happen as a result. So what has happened there, I believe, can happen anywhere.
To help me with directions. I'd like to invite all the breakout presenters to come up to the platform with me. Join me up here. And we're going to introduce the presenters to you. I don't need to introduce Pastor Bill anymore. He's going to be right here in the sanctuary for the 3:45 session, but I'm going to introduce everyone else, okay? Okay. So, my friend Melvin Santos is actually in Kentucky-Tennessee Conference now. He's the pastor of the Nashville First Church, and through implementing his discipleship methods and programming, last year the church planted 3 churches, and this year they're launching 3 additional churches. So there's a reason behind that. So if you want to find out why, attend one of his seminars. His first one is Unleashing the Power Through Discipleship. And at 3:45, the Sustainable Church, okay? Pastor Santos is going to be moving to a new post, very nearby almost, but not really. It's in Alaska. So
That sounds suspicious. He plants 6 churches, and then he leaves.
He's gone. So don't get any crazy ideas, anyone else. Okay, so he's going to be a VP for administration there in Alaska. But before he goes there, he's here with us, all right? Okay, so he's going to be in Colburn Hall. If you don't know how to get to these places, don't worry. We'll give instructions in just a moment. Okay, so Stuart Lazinski is someone referred by Elder Hartman of the Kentucky-Tennessee Conference as well. Say, hey, if we're looking for church revitalization pastors. And so he said, okay, top of the list, Stuart Lazinski. So he's here with us, and he's here to share. In every district he's pastored, there's been a revitalization. Okay, so no one on this platform has not been a revitalizing pastor. So we're not bringing you just thoughts and theories. We're bringing you practitioners. We've had excellent leaders speak here, organizational leaders, who have also been church revitalizers in their own right. You know, Elder Dan Jackson, and we're going to hear from others as well, Elder Ron Smith. But these are practitioners. They're in the field right now, and they're church revitalizing pastors, okay? All right, so Stuart's going to be in the choir room, and his topic is going to be leading the turnaround. Even your church can grow, and that's at 2:45, again, in the choir room. Thank you, Stuart. Okay, so Nick?
Yes.
All right, Nick has got a whole team from Australia here. So they were at the North American Division E-Huddle, which is the evangelism meeting for the leaders of the NAD. And so he's going to give the names of his whole team. You see they look so sharp in their shirts, so I'll let you share.
Okay, we'll start from Abel, from over there. Pastor Abel Iagulescu is the pastor of Memorial Adventist Church, probably the largest church we have in our South Pacific Division, 800 to 1,000 members. Then we have Joseph Scaff, who is our home church coordinator and also planting a church at the moment. And then we have Jacob Wills, who is our pastor in the northwest part of our conference. It's far. It's a really far place. There are kangaroos on the way, but you'll hear about later on. And then we have Jared Smith, who's a pastor of our Foresters Beach Church, a very affluent area in the southern part of our conference. And I'm the Church Revitalization Director for our conference office, and in my spare time I pastor a church.
In your spare time. Okay, so this is in the New North South Wales Conference, is that correct?
North New South Wales
Okay.
Conference. Yep, close.
If you mix it up, it's
good.
All right. So, but they know where they're from, and they're going to be talking about church revitalization down under, okay? So, also first world context, what works there is also going to be able to be translatable right here. And so some of you are here just to hear from them. So that's going to be right here at 2:45, right in our next session, right here in the sanctuary. So looking forward to that.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, so, and then, where's Olin? Olin, are you here? Oh, come on up, Olin. Okay, so Olin is a lay pastor, the only one now that's on the platform that is a lay pastor. And so, and I just met Olin and Roxanne, wave Roxanne, all right, at Romance at the Ranch, the couples retreat for married couples at Nasoka Pines just a couple of weeks ago. And they're just a super couple, and they're lay pastor in the South Atlantic Conference, north of Atlanta, is that right?
Lay leader, I'm not.
Okay, he's a little shy with the term pastor, so we'll go with lay leader for now, okay? But if you call him lay pastor, I don't think he'll have a problem. Okay, so especially when you see some of the pictures in his testimony a little bit later. So he is a lay leader of a church plant, okay? Some of you are leaders of church plants. So when he and Roxanne came to the church plant, they had a whopping, how many people? Two. Okay? So the church plant was about to die. Okay? And then now you want to hear the rest of the story. In their session, again, they're going to be starting also at 3:45. Also going to be in the choir room. So Pastor Davis, if you can help us to know, obviously we know where the sanctuary is, but what about Colburn Hall and the choir room?
Okay, as far as Colburn Hall, just go out into our lobby and turn right. You'll go down the steps, across the driveway, up the steps, and into Colburn Hall, our fellowship hall, right underneath through the canopy. And then in the choir room, just take these two exits either side of the platform. They'll loop around the back, and then you'll go through the middle door that goes across kind of a catwalk over to our church offices. And then as soon as you go through that door, then you'll just turn in the right, and the choir room is right there. So,
okay, if you're not excellent with directions, like Pastor Davis, you can follow Pastor Davis or myself, one of us. Pastor, are you okay with that? Okay, once we break here, and even if you are going to be going to the 3:45 session in the choir room, you still want to go take a look how to get there, okay? Because it's not the easiest. I mean, you could just go through this wall if you're like Jesus, right? And go through, and eventually you'll be taking a right once you get to the church offices. But since you're not, you're going to need to follow Pastor Davis, okay? Even if you want to see where it is for 3:45. Again, Colburn Hall, you just go through here and go towards the school, into the school building, and you'll see a sign that you just keep going until you'll hear people, okay? All right. So let's go ahead and get started, and please do not ask a whole lot of questions at the very end of the sessions, but ask your questions of these presenters after they get done with their session, okay? If that's okay with you, they may have time during the sessions, but as far as towards the tail end, don't hold them up because they need to let the next session begin, okay? Okay, so let's go ahead and separate for the sessions. You guys are right here, and you may need some mics, so
Yes, thank
you can
you.
use these two handhelds.
Fantastic.
You want this one?
No, I can use the handhelds. That's fine. Thank you.
All right, then I'm going to
That's
just
one.
hang on to it till the next one.
All right.